Welcome to Phantom Tales, where chilling stories come to life. If you enjoy tonight's tale, please like and subscribe. It really helps. Let me know where you're listening from, and get ready for a night of suspense and mystery. Let's begin. For as long as I could remember, I had a habit of watching the world through my window. It wasn't out of loneliness or boredom, but something about observing the little details of life felt strangely comforting. My apartment was on the third floor of a quiet building, and my window overlooked the street below. I'd watch people walk their dogs, kids race their bikes, and, most consistently, cars pass by. I became familiar with the rhythm of things. Each evening, between 9 p.m. and 10 p.m., a red sedan would drive by my building. It was so regular I could have set my watch to it. There was nothing particularly unusual about the car. It wasn't flashy, and it never lingered. It would simply roll past and disappear down the road. At first, it was just part of the scenery. But over time, I noticed something odd. The car never missed a single day. Rain or shine, it would appear. Snowstorms, power outages. It didn't matter. Even when the entire neighborhood seemed silent, the red sedan would roll by like clockwork. It became unsettling. One night, curiosity got the better of me. I stayed up, my eyes fixed on the street below. I wanted to get a better look at the driver, maybe catch a glimpse of their face. When the clock hit 9:17 p.m., the car appeared as usual, its headlights cutting through the dark. It slowed slightly as it passed my building, and for the first time, I leaned closer, squinting to see inside. The driver was staring directly at me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I couldn't make out their features, but the figure behind the wheel was unmistakably facing me. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The car just idled there, as though daring me to look away. Then, just like that, it rolled forward and disappeared into the night. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was a coincidence. Maybe the driver noticed a shadow in my window or happened to glance up. But the next night it happened again, and this time, the car didn't keep moving. At exactly 9:17 p.m., the red sedan appeared. It stopped in front of my building, the engine humming softly. I felt my pulse quicken as I watched from behind the curtain. Slowly, the driver's side window began to roll down. My apartment was silent except for the pounding of my heartbeat. I couldn't see much, just the outline of a figure sitting perfectly still. Then, from the open window, a sound drifted up. It was a whistle, a long, slow tune, almost melodic but deeply unsettling. I had never heard anything like it. It didn't feel random. It felt deliberate, like the driver knew I was there and was performing for me. I stepped back from the window, my hands trembling. The whistling continued for what felt like an eternity, and then, with no warning, the car pulled away. For the next week, I stopped watching the window altogether. I couldn't bear to look, terrified of what I might see. I even considered staying somewhere else, but my friends would have thought I was being ridiculous. "It's just a car," I imagined them saying. But I knew it was more than that. On the 8th night, I cracked. Curiosity and fear got the best of me. I peeked through the curtain at 9:17 p.m. The car was already there, parked in its usual spot. The driver's side window was rolled down again, but this time the whistling stopped as soon as I appeared. And then, the driver stepped out. My heart dropped. For the first time, I saw the figure clearly, a tall man dressed in a dark coat and hat. I couldn't see his face, but something about him made my skin crawl. He didn't move at first, just stood next to the car, facing my building. Then, slowly, he tilted his head upward, his attention fixed on my window. He knew I was watching. I ducked down, pressing my back against the wall, my breathing sharp and shallow. I didn't dare look again. For what felt like hours, I sat there, waiting for the sound of the car pulling away. Finally, it did. The next day, I didn't go to work. I didn't leave my apartment. I kept all the curtains shut and jumped at every little noise. By evening, I convinced myself it was over. Maybe the man had gotten bored, or maybe I'd imagined the entire thing. But that night, just after 9 p.m., I heard it, the whistling. This time, it wasn't coming from outside. The sound was faint but unmistakable, drifting up from somewhere inside the building. I felt a chill run through me. It was impossible. How could he be inside? I grabbed my phone, ready to call for help, but then the whistling stopped. A knock echoed through my apartment. 3 sharp raps on the front door. I froze, my phone slipping from my hand. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The knock came again, louder this time. Whoever was outside wasn't leaving. Summoning every ounce of courage, I crept to the door and looked through the peephole. There was no one there. I stepped back, my entire body trembling. Then I heard it again, soft, deliberate whistling, coming from the hallway. I don't remember much after that. I must have passed out because when I woke up, it was morning, and sunlight streamed through the cracks in my curtains. Everything was silent, almost too silent. I grabbed my things, left the apartment, and didn't look back. I moved out that day, breaking the lease and never returning. Weeks later, I heard about a news story from that neighborhood. A red sedan had been found abandoned in a nearby river. The police said it had been empty for months. No driver, no clues. But the car matched the description perfectly. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear that whistle in the back of my mind. And when I close my eyes, I see the shadow of a figure standing next to a red sedan, looking up at my window, waiting. Moving into an old house on the outskirts of town seemed like a dream come true. It was cheap, secluded, and had the kind of charm only older places possess. Cracked wooden floors, vintage wallpaper, and a creaky staircase that made the house feel alive. I wasn't picky. All I needed was peace and quiet, a space to focus on my work, and an escape from the chaos of city life. From the moment I moved in, though, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house wasn't completely empty. I would find doors slightly ajar when I was certain I'd closed them, hear faint footsteps at night, or smell something unfamiliar, like stale wood and cigarette smoke, when I wandered into certain rooms. One day, as I was unpacking boxes in the attic, I stumbled upon an old wooden radio sitting on a dusty shelf. It was vintage, with knobs and dials that had long faded. Something about it seemed wrong, almost like it didn't belong there. The radio was heavy and worn, yet clean, as though someone had used it recently. Despite my unease, I brought it downstairs, thinking it might make for a unique decoration. That night, the trouble started. I was sitting in the living room when the radio turned on by itself. Static crackled through the speakers, cutting through the silence. I nearly jumped out of my chair, staring at it. I hadn't touched the thing since bringing it down. Slowly, I approached and twisted the knob, trying to turn it off, but the static persisted. Then, through the distorted noise, I heard something faint. A voice. At first, it was muffled, as though someone were speaking from far away. I leaned closer, straining to hear. "Can you hear me? Hello?" I froze, my fingers hovering over the dial. The voice sounded distant, pleading. "Who is this?" I whispered before realizing how absurd I looked, talking to an empty radio. Static roared, and the voice disappeared. I turned the radio off and yanked its plug from the wall, deciding it had to be broken. For a while, silence returned to the house, but the uneasy feeling lingered. That night, I awoke to the sound of music. A low, haunting tune played softly, as though coming from another room. Confused and half asleep, I followed the sound down the dark hallway. When I reached the living room, the radio sat on the table, turned on. The music stopped the moment I entered. This time, the voice returned, clearer now. "Don't leave me." I stared at the radio, my breath hitching in my throat. It wasn't possible. It was unplugged. But there it was, as alive as ever, crackling and humming like it had a mind of its own. I grabbed it, ready to toss it outside, but as soon as my hands touched the wood, a chill spread through my body. The voice changed, deepening into something guttural and angry. "You shouldn't be here." The words reverberated through the room. The lights flickered, and for a split second, I thought I saw a shadow standing in the corner of the room. I dropped the radio and backed away, tripping over a chair in my haste. That night, I locked myself in my bedroom, but the voice followed me. I could hear it faintly through the walls, whispering my name, begging, then shouting in bursts of static. I barely slept. By morning, I was ready to leave the house entirely. I couldn't stay another night. I grabbed the radio, intending to destroy it once and for all. I took it out to the backyard where I had an old fire pit. My hands shook as I placed it inside and lit a match. Flames curled around the wood, and for a moment, I felt relief. Then the radio began to scream. A blood-curdling human scream erupted from the speakers as the fire consumed it. I stumbled back, covering my ears. The sound was deafening, unnatural, like hundreds of voices crying out at once. I watched, horrified, as the radio burned. When the flames finally died, the yard fell silent again. All that remained was ash. I thought it was over. It wasn't. That night, I heard the music again. The same low, haunting tune drifted through the house. I knew it couldn't be real. I had burned the radio. But as I sat in my bed, paralyzed with fear, the whispers returned. "Why did you destroy me?" I looked around, my heart pounding. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, seeping from the walls and floor. "You brought me here, and now you're mine." The lights flickered and shadows moved across the room. The air turned icy and I could feel something watching me. I ran. I didn't stop to grab anything. I bolted out the front door and didn't look back. The next day, I contacted the landlord and handed over my keys. I told him I didn't need my deposit back. I just wanted out. He didn't seem surprised, just nodded and muttered, "I thought that radio was gone for good." It's been months since I left that house, but the whispers haven't stopped. Sometimes in the dead of night I hear faint music coming from nowhere and I know it's still following me. Some things aren't meant to be disturbed, and some voices are meant to remain unheard. When I moved into my new apartment, I thought I had finally found the perfect place to start over. It was a small but clean unit on the top floor of an old building downtown. The landlord mentioned it had been vacant for years, and I didn't ask why. I was desperate for a fresh start after a string of bad luck. At first, everything seemed normal. I settled in quickly, unpacking my things, arranging furniture, and enjoying the silence of living alone. The first few days passed uneventfully, but on the fourth night, something strange happened. I woke up around 3 a.m., thirsty, and walked to the kitchen for a glass of water. As I passed the living room, I noticed the air felt colder than usual. That's when I saw it. The armchair by the window. It wasn't mine. I never owned an armchair like that, yet there it was, an old, faded piece of furniture with worn velvet upholstery. I froze. I was certain it hadn't been there before. I turned on every light in the apartment, searching for an explanation. Maybe I had been so tired from moving in that I hadn't noticed it? Maybe the landlord had left it behind? It didn't make sense, but I convinced myself I was overthinking. I covered the chair with a sheet and went back to bed. The next night, it got worse. I woke up to the sound of faint creaking, like someone shifting their weight in a chair. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, and listened. The sound came from the living room. I tiptoed toward the doorway, holding my breath. The chair was uncovered. The sheet I'd thrown over it was crumpled on the floor, and the chair was now slightly turned to face me. My blood ran cold. I stared at it for what felt like hours, then grabbed the sheet, covered it again, and muttered to myself that I was imagining things. I avoided the living room after that, but the noises continued. Some nights I'd hear soft footsteps, like someone pacing near the chair. Other nights I'd wake to faint whispers that seemed to echo through the apartment. Words I couldn't understand. One evening, I invited a friend over, desperate for company. We sat on the couch, chatting and watching TV, but every now and then he glanced toward the chair. "Where'd you get that old thing?" he asked, frowning. "I didn't," I said quickly. "It was here when I moved in." He stared at me for a moment, then shrugged. "Creepy. It feels like someone's sitting there, doesn't it?" That was the last time he visited. The following night, I decided I'd had enough. I grabbed the chair and dragged it out of the apartment. It was heavier than I expected, but I managed to haul it down the stairs and into the alley behind the building. I left it there in the shadows and returned to my apartment, relieved to have it gone. But that night, I woke up to the sound of someone breathing. It was close, too close. I opened my eyes and froze. The chair was back. It sat in the corner of my bedroom, facing me. My chest tightened and I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I just lay there, staring at the outline of that terrible chair until the first light of dawn. I didn't sleep the next night or the one after that. Every evening, the chair seemed to get closer to my bed. First, it was in the corner. Then, by the foot of the bed. Then, just a few feet away. I could feel something sitting in it, watching me. The air grew colder, heavier, and the whispers turned into quiet chuckles. On the 7th night, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my phone and called the landlord. He answered groggily, clearly annoyed. "You need to tell me about the chair," I demanded, my voice shaking. There was a long pause. "Did you move it?" he asked softly. "What?" "The chair. Did you move it?" "Yes. I tried to get rid of it, but it keeps coming back." He sighed, and I heard the exhaustion in his voice. "Listen, I didn't want to scare you, but you need to leave it alone. Don't move it again." "What are you talking about?" I snapped. "It belonged to a tenant from years ago. She never left." The line went dead. I sat in silence, the phone still pressed to my ear. Slowly, I turned to look at the chair. This time, I wasn't alone. A figure sat there. It was faint, like a shadow, but I could see her. A woman with hollow eyes and a wide, unblinking stare. She sat perfectly still, hands resting on the arms of the chair, her face twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. She tilted her head, and for the first time, I heard her voice. "You moved my chair." The room grew darker, colder, and the whispers returned. Louder now, swirling around me in a chorus of angry voices. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The next morning, a neighbor found me sitting on the floor in my bedroom, staring at the chair. I couldn't speak. I couldn't explain what had happened. All I remember was the voice, the whispers, and the feeling of being watched. I moved out that same day. Weeks later, I drove by the building one last time. My window was open, and I could have sworn I saw the chair through the glass, sitting in its usual place by the window. And in the corner of my eye, I thought I saw her too, sitting there, watching, waiting for the next person to move her chair. I needed a job. After months of unemployment and dwindling savings, I couldn't afford to be picky. So, when I saw the ad for a night security guard at an old lighthouse along the rocky coast, I applied without hesitation. It didn't matter that the lighthouse hadn't been functional for decades or that it was miles away from town. I just needed the paycheck. The job sounded simple enough. My duties were to keep an eye on the property overnight, patrol the grounds, and log any unusual activity. The owner, who I only ever spoke to on the phone, mentioned vague reports of vandals breaking into the place, probably local teenagers looking for a thrill. I didn't ask questions. I showed up on a rainy Monday evening, flashlight and thermos in hand, ready for my first shift. The lighthouse was more imposing than I expected. It towered over the cliffside, its rusted exterior and cracked windows giving it a skeletal appearance against the darkening sky. The wind howled as I parked my car and trudged up the muddy path toward the door. My key scraped in the lock and the heavy door groaned open as if reluctant to let me in. Inside, the air was damp and stale, and the faint smell of salt water mixed with something metallic. The interior was sparse. A small office with a desk and logbook, a winding spiral staircase leading up to the lantern room, and a basement that the owner advised I stay out of. Apparently, it was structurally unsafe. I shrugged off the unease creeping up my spine and started my first patrol. For the first few hours, nothing happened. I paced the perimeter outside, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the mist. The only sounds were the wind, the crashing waves below, and the occasional cry of gulls. By midnight, I was back in the office, scribbling in the logbook. No activity. Quiet night. But as I sat there, I felt it, that strange sensation of being watched. I turned toward the window behind me. The glass was fogged up, but faintly I could see something smudged there. I leaned in closer. It was a handprint, small, like a child's, pressed into the misted surface. My pulse quickened. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside to check. There was no one. I circled the lighthouse twice, shining my beam into the darkness. Nothing but rocks and grass and the endless black sea. Kids, I muttered to myself, trying to stay rational. Maybe the vandals had been here earlier in the day, and I'd just missed the mark on the window. The wind picked up as I returned inside, but now the lighthouse felt different, heavier. I sat back at the desk, trying to focus on the logbook. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught movement. The beam of light at the top of the lighthouse, the one that hadn't worked in decades, was slowly rotating. I froze. My mind tried to rationalize it. Maybe there was still some automatic mechanism kicking in. Maybe a power surge. Anything other than what my gut was screaming at me. I grabbed the flashlight and started up the winding staircase, my footsteps echoing in the tight, narrow space. The climb felt endless, the air growing colder with each step. By the time I reached the top, my breath was visible in the dim light. The lantern room was empty. The massive glass lens, cracked and dusty, was still and silent. I ran my hands over the machinery, dead and rusted. Nothing here could have turned the light. As I turned to leave, my flashlight flickered. I smacked it, muttering under my breath, but then I noticed something else. The handprints. Dozens of them. They covered the glass walls of the lantern room. Tiny, pale prints pressed against the surface as though from the outside. I staggered back, my heart pounding, and nearly tripped over something on the floor. It was a boot, old, leather, and soaked through with seawater. I didn't stay to investigate further. I clambered back down the staircase as fast as my shaking legs could carry me. Back in the office, I locked the door and tried to steady my breathing. "It's in my head," I whispered to myself. "It's just a creepy old place playing tricks on me." But then I heard it. Footsteps above me. Slow, deliberate steps coming down the spiral staircase. I turned toward the doorway leading to the stairs, my flashlight shaking in my hand. The steps grew louder, closer, until they stopped just outside the door. I held my breath, waiting, but no one entered. Then came the knocking. Soft at first, like fingertips tapping on wood. Tap, tap, tap. I backed away, every instinct screaming at me to run. The knocking turned into pounding, violent and frenzied, rattling the door on its hinges. "Who's there?" I choked out. The pounding stopped. A voice whispered from the other side. "Help us." I bolted. I didn't grab my thermos, my keys, or my dignity. I sprinted out of the lighthouse, slipping and sliding down the muddy path to my car. I didn't look back as I sped down the coastal road, the lighthouse shrinking in my rearview mirror. The next morning, I called the owner to quit. He didn't sound surprised. "You lasted longer than most," he said quietly. "Some of them never made it to sunrise." "What's in that place?" I demanded. There was a pause. "The lighthouse keeper and his family," he finally said. "They vanished during a storm over 100 years ago. Locals say their spirits still roam the grounds, waiting for someone to bring them home." I hung up the phone and never looked back. A week later, I heard the news. The lighthouse had been struck by lightning during a storm. It burned to the ground. Some part of me hoped that meant whatever was haunting it was finally gone. But late at night, when the wind howls against my windows, I still hear it. The faint sound of tapping. Tap, tap, tap. I'd been driving for hours along a desolate country road, the kind of stretch where you start to wonder if the world has ended and no one told you. My phone had no signal, and my gas tank hovered near empty. I needed to stop. That's when I saw it. An old farmhouse in the distance, silhouetted against the orange haze of the evening sky. There was no sign of life, but a narrow dirt path led straight to it. With no other option, I decided to check it out. The farmhouse looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Broken windows, peeling paint, and a sagging porch. An old barn stood behind it, its doors swaying in the breeze. I parked my car and stepped out, calling out to see if anyone was home. No response. The place was eerily quiet, save for the occasional caw of a crow. I climbed the porch steps and knocked. The door creaked open on its own. It was as though the house was inviting me in. I should have left right then. But curiosity got the better of me. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the smell of dust and decay. Furniture was covered in sheets, and a thick layer of grime coated every surface. As I walked through the living room, I noticed something strange. The walls were covered in old photographs. Hundreds of them. They were black and white portraits of people. Men, women, children, all staring blankly at the camera. Some of the photos were so faded that the faces were barely visible, but they all had one thing in common: their eyes. No matter where I stood, it felt like the eyes were following me. Chills crawled down my spine and I turned to leave. That's when I heard it. A faint whisper. It came from upstairs. "Hello," I called, my voice shaking. No answer. Just silence. Against all common sense, I found myself climbing the stairs, each step creaking beneath my weight. At the top was a narrow hallway with 3 doors. The whispering grew louder, echoing faintly through the walls. I couldn't make out what it was saying, but it sounded like chanting. I pushed open the first door. The room was empty except for a rocking chair in the corner. It was moving, slowly, back and forth. I stared at it, frozen. The windows were shut, there was no breeze, and yet the chair rocked steadily. I backed out and tried the second door. This room was different. It looked like a child's bedroom with a small bed and toys scattered across the floor. I stepped inside and froze when I noticed a doll sitting on the bed. It was old and tattered, its face cracked and its eyes missing. That's when I heard the floorboards creak behind me. I spun around, heart pounding, but no one was there. I bolted out of the room and yanked open the third door. It was a study, cluttered with papers, books, and more photographs. But these pictures were different. They were of the farmhouse itself. The images showed the house in pristine condition, surrounded by cornfields. In every photo, there was a figure standing in the distance, always in the same spot, always facing the house. I picked up one of the photos and brought it closer. The figure had no face. A crash echoed from downstairs, shattering the silence. I dropped the photo and ran. My footsteps thundered as I sprinted down the staircase and toward the front door. But when I reached the bottom, I stopped. The photographs from the walls were now scattered across the floor, their frames smashed. In the center of the room stood the rocking chair, and sitting in it was the doll from the bedroom. Its empty eye sockets stared at me, and I swear its mouth had twisted into a smile. I didn't wait. I ran outside, fumbling for my car keys. The sun had set, and darkness consumed the farmhouse. I jumped into my car, turned the key, and nothing. The engine wouldn't start. That's when I saw them. Silhouettes. They emerged from the barn, the cornfields, the house itself. Dozens of figures, all walking toward me. They moved slowly, their heads tilted unnaturally to the side, their arms dangling. I slammed my fist against the steering wheel, praying for the car to start. Suddenly, a face appeared at the driver's side window. Pale and expressionless, its hollow eyes locked onto mine. I screamed and turned the key one last time. The engine roared to life. I floored it, tearing down the dirt path and back to the main road. My hands were shaking, my heart racing. I didn't dare look in the rearview mirror. I didn't want to see if they were following me. When I finally reached the nearest town, I stopped at a gas station and told the attendant everything. He stared at me for a long moment, then said something I'll never forget. "You went to the old Dawson place, didn't you?" I nodded. He shook his head. "That house has been abandoned for over 50 years. The last family that lived there vanished. People say the land is cursed." I didn't ask for more details. I didn't want to know. To this day, I still dream about that farmhouse, about the photographs, the doll, and the figures in the fields. I don't drive through the country anymore, and I never stop near old houses, because I know now, some doors should never be opened. I've always been a fan of camping. The peace, the escape from noise, the feeling of being surrounded by nature, it clears my mind like nothing else. This particular trip, however, would be different. My friends bailed at the last minute, and instead of rescheduling, I stubbornly decided to go alone. I packed my gear, picked a spot far from civilization, deep within the forgotten forest, and set off, eager to enjoy a weekend of solitude. The drive out took hours. The forest was dense, its canopy blocking out much of the sunlight. By the time I reached a clearing, the air felt cooler, heavier, like the place held its breath. I set up camp quickly, pitched my tent, started a small fire, and took a seat in my folding chair, watching the flames dance. As evening fell, the quiet became oppressive. No crickets chirped, no birds sang. It was pure, unsettling silence. I shook it off, convincing myself it was normal for such a remote area. After all, it wasn't my first time camping alone. The first strange sound came just after dark, a distant snap, like a branch breaking underfoot. I froze. It was faint, but unmistakable. I aimed my flashlight toward the tree line, its weak beam cutting through the darkness. Nothing moved. "It's probably a deer," I muttered to myself, but my voice felt out of place in the unnatural stillness. I crawled into my tent an hour later, zipped it shut, and buried myself in my sleeping bag. My flashlight was within reach, just in case. I lay there listening for any sound, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. At some point, I must have drifted off. Then I woke up. It was pitch black. I don't know what woke me. There was no noise, no movement, just an overwhelming feeling of being watched. I held my breath and listened. That's when I heard it. Soft, deliberate footsteps circling my tent. My body went cold. Someone, or something, was out there. I grabbed the flashlight and clicked it on, shining it against the tent walls. Shadows moved, long, distorted shapes shifting just beyond the fabric. The footsteps stopped. "Hello," I called, my voice trembling. No answer. After a minute of silence, I unzipped the tent just enough to peek outside. I scanned the area with my flashlight. The clearing was empty. No movement, no sign of life. I almost convinced myself it was my imagination until I noticed something. The fire I'd built earlier was out, its embers cold. I knew it had been burning when I went to bed. Someone had put it out. I zipped the tent back up and sat in the dark, gripping the flashlight like a lifeline. I didn't sleep again that night. By morning, the forest seemed almost normal again. Sunlight poured through the trees, birds chirped faintly in the distance. I packed up my gear as quickly as I could, eager to leave. That's when I saw them. Footprints. They circled my tent and led toward the tree line. But they weren't mine. These were larger, deeper, like whoever made them was dragging their feet. I followed them with my eyes until they disappeared into the dense woods. I told myself not to look back as I loaded up my car, but as I climbed in, I felt that same prickling sensation of being watched. I couldn't resist. I turned toward the tree line. There, standing just beyond the shadows, was a figure. It was tall and thin, its limbs too long, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. I couldn't make out any features, but I knew it was staring right at me. I hit the gas and tore out of the clearing, gravel spraying as I sped down the dirt road. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away, my heart still racing. For weeks after, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd brought something back with me. At night, I'd wake up to the sound of faint footsteps outside my window, always stopping just as I grabbed my flashlight. I don't camp anymore. I don't go near forests. Because whatever was out there that night is still watching me, and I know that if I ever go back, it'll be waiting. Being a pizza delivery driver isn't exactly glamorous, but it pays the bills and keeps things simple. I've been working for Tony's Pizza for about a year now, and while most deliveries are mundane, sometimes you get a story to tell. Strange customers, unusual requests, maybe even the occasional generous tip. I thought I'd seen it all. That was until one night when I got a call for a delivery to an address I'd never seen before, right at the edge of town. It was a quiet Tuesday night. The roads were empty and the clock ticked past 11 p.m. when the order came in. The address didn't show up on my GPS, but Tony handed me the slip and pointed vaguely at the old highway leading out of town. "Just head down that way. It's an old house. Been there forever," Tony said. "Probably some kids pulling a prank, but go drop it off anyway. They paid online." The fact that it was prepaid didn't ease my nerves. I grabbed the pizza, shoved it into the heated bag, and hopped into my car. The drive felt longer than I expected. As I got closer, the streetlights thinned out, and all I had was my headlights cutting through the darkness. The road was cracked and overgrown, the kind of place no one had cared about in decades. I thought about turning around, but curiosity, or maybe stupidity, kept me going. Finally, I saw it. The house stood alone at the end of the dirt road, hidden behind twisted trees and vines. It was massive, but time had done its damage. Broken windows, peeling paint, and a roof that looked like it was barely holding on. The air around it felt still, heavy, like it didn't belong to this world. I double-checked the address on the slip. This was the place. "All right," I whispered to myself, trying to shake off the creeping dread. "Just drop the pizza and get out." I grabbed the bag, walked up the cracked stone steps, and knocked on the door. The sound echoed through the house, too loud for how empty it felt. Nothing. I knocked again, louder this time. Still no answer. I considered just leaving the pizza on the doorstep, but something stopped me. Then I heard it, a faint sound from inside. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, moving closer to the door. The door creaked open just a few inches. I squinted into the dark. Pizza delivery?" I called out. No reply. The footsteps had stopped. I leaned in slightly, trying to see past the gap. A sickly, sweet smell hit me. Rotting wood, damp air, something metallic. My instincts screamed at me to turn and run, but before I could move, the door opened a bit wider. No one was there. The hallway beyond the door was pitch black, but I could feel something watching me from the shadows. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I took a step back, ready to drop the pizza and leave, when I heard a voice. "Come in." It was a whisper, so faint I wasn't sure if I'd imagined it. My heart was pounding now, my palms sweaty as I gripped the pizza bag. I'll just leave this here," I said quickly, placing the box on the porch. I turned to go, but the door suddenly slammed shut behind me with a deafening bang. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. That's when I noticed something. Shadows moving behind the cracked windows, darting back and forth, too fast to be human. I bolted down the steps, nearly tripping as I ran to my car. I threw myself inside, locked the doors, and turned the key. The engine sputtered, refusing to start. No, I muttered, glancing back at the house. The windows were dark again, but I could feel eyes on me. Finally, the car roared to life. I hit the gas and sped away, gravel kicking up behind me. I didn't stop driving until I was back at the pizza shop, panting and shaking. Tony looked up as I walked in. Back already? What happened? That house, at the edge of town, I stammered, trying to find the words. It's abandoned, Tony. No one's there. Tony's expression darkened. He leaned on the counter, his voice low. What house? The one at the end of the old highway, I insisted. The order came from there. Tony stared at me for a moment, then shook his head. That house burned down over 30 years ago. There's nothing there but ashes. I couldn't breathe. What do you mean? I was just there. Someone answered. Something was in there. Tony didn't reply. He just looked at me like I'd lost my mind. I glanced down at the delivery slip. The address was still there, but the order number was blank, the details smeared. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying what happened, trying to convince myself it was a prank or a hallucination. But the next morning, as I walked to my car, I froze. Sitting on my hood was the same pizza box I'd left at that house. The cardboard was soggy, the logo faded, as if it had been left in the rain for weeks. I hesitated, then opened the lid. Inside wasn't pizza. It was a photograph. A photo of me standing at the front door of that house, staring into the darkness. I don't deliver pizzas anymore. I never thought much about the house I grew up in. It wasn't particularly old or creepy, just a plain 2-story house at the edge of town, surrounded by woods on 3 sides. My parents had bought it when I was just a kid, and I had lived there most of my life without anything strange ever happening. That was until I came back as an adult to clean it out after they passed away. The task was as emotionally draining as it was physical. My parents were collectors, or hoarders, depending on how you looked at it. Every room was stuffed with boxes, old furniture, and forgotten relics from decades past. I had taken a week off work to sort through it all, but after 3 days, I was still only halfway done. It was on the 4th day that I noticed something strange. I was in the hallway on the 2nd floor, organizing some old photo albums when I leaned against the wall and felt it give. Just slightly, like it wasn't as solid as it should be. I frowned and knocked on the surface. It sounded hollow. That didn't make sense. I'd walked through this house 1,000 times and I knew every inch of it. But I couldn't ignore it. I grabbed a flashlight and a hammer from the garage. Back in the hallway, I hesitated. It's just a wall, I muttered, trying to shake the unease crawling up my spine. But something in me had to know what was behind it. With a few swings, the drywall cracked and crumbled, and after clearing the dust, I saw it. A doorway. It was narrow and set a bit deeper into the wall than seemed natural. The door itself was old, much older than the rest of the house, with a rusted brass knob and wood that was warped and discolored. I stood there for a long time, just staring at it. I didn't remember this door, and I couldn't figure out why my parents would have hidden it. Finally, curiosity got the better of me. I twisted the knob. The door creaked open into darkness. I swept my flashlight beam over the space. It was a small room, tiny, really, no bigger than a closet. The walls were bare, made of rough stone instead of the smooth drywall used in the rest of the house. The air was thick and stale, like it hadn't moved in years. Dust particles floated in the beam of my light, and in the center of the room sat a chair. It was just a plain, wooden chair, old and weathered like the rest of the space, but something about it felt wrong. My flashlight flickered as I stepped inside. I looked around carefully, half expecting to find some hidden treasure or explanation, but there was nothing. Just stone walls, the chair, and a feeling that made my skin crawl. Then, as I turned to leave, I noticed something carved into the back of the door. Words. I leaned in closer, my flashlight shaking slightly in my hand. Do not sit, do not speak, do not stay after dark. A chill ran down my spine. I had no idea who had written it or when, but the message was clear enough. I wasn't supposed to be here. I slammed the door shut and hurried back to the hallway. I told myself to forget about it, that the room was probably just some weird leftover from when the house was built. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. That night, as I lay in bed in my old childhood room, I couldn't sleep. Every sound made me flinch. Every creak of the old house felt deliberate. At some point I drifted off, but I woke suddenly a few hours later to an overwhelming silence. It was the kind of silence that's too quiet, where you realize even the wind outside has stopped. Then I heard it, a faint scraping sound like wood dragging against stone. My chest tightened as I sat up. It was coming from the hallway, the direction of that room. I grabbed the flashlight and crept out of bed, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe an animal, or my imagination. The hallway was dark and the door to the hidden room was ajar. My flashlight beam wavered as I stepped closer. The scraping sound stopped. I hesitated at the door, holding my breath. Then, from inside the room, I heard a whisper. "Come sit." I stumbled back, my heart racing. The voice was soft and scratchy, like someone who hadn't spoken in years. I slammed the door shut and locked myself in my bedroom, refusing to come out until morning. When the sun rose, I tried to convince myself I'd imagined everything. Maybe it was stress or grief messing with my head. But as I walked past the hallway that morning, I froze. The door to the hidden room was open again, and the chair was now sitting in the hallway, directly facing my bedroom door. I left the house that day and never went back. I hired a team to finish cleaning it out and told them to seal up that part of the hallway. I don't know what they found, if anything, but I don't care. I sold the house shortly after, and I never looked back. But sometimes late at night when I'm alone in my new apartment, I swear I can hear it. The faint sound of wood scraping against stone, as if something is still waiting for me to come back. It started the week I moved into my new apartment. I had been looking for somewhere affordable after a recent job transfer, and when I found this place, quiet, cheap, and only slightly run down, it seemed perfect. The building was old, but I didn't care. I needed a fresh start, and it seemed harmless enough. The first few nights were uneventful. I unpacked my things, settled in, and began adjusting to my new routine. It wasn't until the third night that I noticed something strange. I had just returned home from work, exhausted. As I was taking off my shoes by the door, I happened to glance out the small window facing the street. It was already dark, and the street below was mostly empty, except for one man. He was standing directly under the street lamp. He wore an old suit, faded and wrinkled, and his posture was perfectly still. So still that at first I thought he was a statue or some weird art installation. But there was no reason for a statue to be there. His head was slightly tilted upward as though he was staring at the window. My window. I pulled the curtain closed, trying to dismiss the unease creeping through me. Maybe he was just some strange guy waiting for someone or something. I didn't want to think about it. But when I checked again an hour later, he was still there. Same spot, same posture. I went to bed that night telling myself it was nothing. But when I woke up the next morning and looked outside, he was gone. The next evening, I couldn't help but check the window again. And there he was, the same man, in the same suit, standing under the same street lamp. He hadn't moved an inch. This time, my unease turned into frustration. Maybe it was some prank or someone playing a game with the neighborhood. I debated going downstairs to confront him, but decided against it. There was something about him, about the way he stood so perfectly still, that made my stomach churn. I convinced myself it was better to just leave it alone. But that night, I had a nightmare. I dreamed I woke up to find the man standing in my room, completely still, his face expressionless as he stared at me. He didn't move, didn't speak, but I could feel an overwhelming presence, like he was waiting for something. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. I didn't look out the window the next morning. I didn't want to know. By the fifth night, it was worse. Not only was the man still there, but I began hearing noises in my apartment. Soft, faint scraping sounds coming from the ceiling or the walls. It sounded like someone was dragging something heavy, slow and deliberate. but no matter how much I searched, I couldn't find the source. I called the landlord to complain, but he just brushed it off. "Old building," he said. "It makes noise sometimes. Don't worry about it." I wasn't convinced. That evening, as I sat on the couch trying to distract myself with TV, I heard the faint sound of tapping. It was coming from the window. My blood ran cold. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help it. Slowly, I turned toward the window. The man was still under the street lamp, but now his head was tilted more upward, his face almost pressed against the glass, despite the fact that I lived on the 3rd floor. He wasn't just staring, he was grinning. I scrambled off the couch, my heart racing, and yanked the curtain shut. I grabbed my phone, but my hands were shaking so badly I dropped it. I didn't know who to call. The police? What would I even say? By the time I worked up the nerve to look again, he was gone. The final night, I decided I had to leave. I couldn't stay there anymore. I packed a bag, fully intending to get a hotel room until I could figure something out. But as I grabbed my keys and opened the door, I froze. The hallway outside my apartment was dark. The lights were flickering, and at the far end of the hall, I saw him. The man. He was standing perfectly still, facing my direction. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my breathing ragged. He wasn't supposed to be inside. How had he gotten in? I ran to the window, hoping I could climb out or scream for help, but when I pulled the curtain open, I froze again. He was outside the window. His face was inches from the glass, his grin impossibly wide. He lifted one hand, his fingers slowly curling into a wave. I stumbled back, knocking over a chair, and heard a noise from behind me. The scraping sound. It was coming from the closet. My mind raced. How could he be outside and in my apartment at the same time? I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. Slowly, I turned toward the closet door. It creaked open just a crack, and I saw a face peeking through the gap. His face. I don't remember what happened next. I must have blacked out because I woke up the next morning on the floor. The apartment was silent. The window was closed. The closet door was shut, and there was no sign of him. I didn't waste any time. I grabbed my things, left the keys on the counter, and walked out of that building for good. I moved to a new city and didn't tell anyone where I was going. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear faint tapping on my window. I don't look anymore. I don't want to know, and I never stay in one place for too long. It was a rainy day when I stumbled across the old art gallery tucked away in the corner of the street. I had just moved to this town and was spending my afternoon exploring the area. The gallery, with its faded sign and cracked windows, stood out against the modern buildings around it. Curiosity pulled me inside. The moment I stepped through the door, a sense of stillness settled over me. The smell of old wood and dust filled the air. The space was dimly lit, with only a few lights shining on the artwork displayed on the walls. Some paintings were beautiful, others dark and eerie, but there was something about this place. Something unsettling. I wandered through the narrow halls, admiring the artwork. But then, at the end of the gallery, I noticed a painting that stood apart from the rest. It wasn't framed like the others. Instead, it was just tacked onto the wall. The colors were muted, and the brushstrokes appeared frantic, almost violent. The painting depicted a woman, but her face was hidden in shadow, and her posture was twisted, like she was caught in the middle of some horrible transformation. What struck me most was the way the eyes seemed to follow me. Every step I took, it felt as if they were staring into me. I couldn't tear my gaze away. There was something so unnerving about it, yet I couldn't leave. I wanted to know more about the painting, but the gallery seemed to be empty. The owner was nowhere to be found. I decided to take a picture of the painting with my phone, thinking it would be a good story to tell later. The second the flash went off, the atmosphere in the room changed. The temperature dropped, and I felt a cold draft brush against my skin. I quickly put my phone away, but the unease I felt lingered. It was like I wasn't alone anymore. As I turned to leave, I heard a faint whisper behind me. I froze. The voice was soft, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. It was the woman from the painting, calling my name. I spun around, heart pounding, but the painting was still there. Only now, it looked different. The woman's eyes were no longer in shadow. They were wide open, filled with an unsettling emptiness that seemed to swallow the room. I couldn't breathe. Panic surged through me as I backed away, my feet stumbling over each other. I turned and ran toward the door, but the moment my hand touched the handle, it slammed shut on its own. The whispering started again, louder this time, echoing around me. It felt like the walls were closing in. The gallery seemed to grow darker, the shadows lengthening as the voice called my name over and over. I was trapped. I pounded on the door, screaming for help, but no one came. The whispers grew into a cacophony, each one more insistent than the last. Then there was a sudden silence. I turned around. The woman from the painting was standing in front of me, her face still obscured in shadow. Her hands reached out, cold and clammy, grasping for me. I could feel the weight of her presence closing in, and I realized that I wasn't just trapped in the gallery. I was trapped in the painting. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. It was like I was frozen in place, unable to escape. The woman's eyes locked onto mine, and I saw her smile. A smile that wasn't hers but mine, twisted and distorted as if it had taken on a life of its own. The next thing I remember, I was outside the gallery, gasping for breath. I don't know how I got there. The rain had stopped and the streets were eerily quiet. The gallery was gone. In its place was a plain brick wall, as if the building had never existed. I haven't told anyone about what happened. No one would believe me. And sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still feel those eyes on me, watching, waiting. I know I'll never be free of that painting. It's a part of me now. And every night, I swear I can hear whispers calling my name. I had just moved into a new apartment in an old building. It wasn't much, but it was affordable, and I wasn't looking for luxury. I had been living alone for a few months when I first discovered the strange door. It was on the far side of the hallway, hidden behind a large wardrobe I hadn't bothered to move. At first, I thought it was just a closet or storage space, but the door didn't have any handles, just a small keyhole. It was odd, considering that every other door in the apartment had regular handles. I ignored it for the longest time, but curiosity eventually got the best of me. One evening, after a long day of work, I found myself staring at that door again. I grabbed a nearby chair and stood on it to inspect it closer. The keyhole wasn't like any I had seen before. It seemed almost ancient, worn with time. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something important behind it. I rummaged through the drawers, searching for something that might fit, but I found nothing. It wasn't until I was cleaning the attic a week later that I found an old, rusted key lying amongst a pile of forgotten trinkets. My heart raced when I saw it. It was the perfect fit for the keyhole. That night, I decided to open the door. The moment the key turned, a cold breeze washed over me, and I hesitated. Something felt off, but I pushed forward, slowly turning the handle and opening the door. Behind it was a small, dimly lit room, unlike anything in the rest of the apartment. The air inside was stale, as though it hadn't been disturbed in decades. The room was empty, save for a dusty old chair in the center of the room and a large, ornate mirror mounted on the far wall. I felt a shiver run down my spine. The mirror seemed to be the only thing in the room that didn't belong. It was old, with an intricate silver frame, but the glass was oddly clear, almost unnaturally so. As I stood there, staring into the mirror, I couldn't help but feel like someone was watching me. I glanced over my shoulder, but the room was empty. Still, the feeling persisted. I looked back at the mirror, and for a brief moment I thought I saw something behind me. Just a shadow, moving in the corner of my eye. I quickly stepped away from the mirror and left the room, locking the door behind me. But that night, something felt wrong. The apartment seemed quieter, colder. I kept hearing strange sounds. Footsteps, doors creaking, soft whispers as though something was lurking just beyond my sight. The next few days were uneventful, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. I had trouble sleeping, and I began to feel uneasy in my own home. Then, one evening, I walked past the hallway and froze. The door to the forgotten room was wide open. My heart raced. I hadn't opened it since that first night. The key was still in my drawer, so it couldn't have been me. But there it was, the door standing open as though inviting me back inside. I approached it hesitantly, and this time, the mirror in the room was different. The once clear surface now seemed foggy and faint. Dark shapes swirled within the glass. My reflection was distorted, twisted, as though someone, was standing behind me. But when I turned around, there was no one there. Panic set in. I tried to leave, but as I turned to shut the door, I heard a faint whisper, soft and unmistakable, coming from the mirror. "Come closer." The words sent chills down my spine, and I bolted out of the room. I locked the door again, but from that moment on, I could never escape the feeling that something was waiting for me in that forgotten room. No matter how many times I locked it, I knew it would always be there, lurking just beyond that door, calling me back. The whispers grew louder each night, urging me to return. And when I dared to peek through the keyhole, I could see movement, shadows dancing inside. I'm not sure how much longer I can stay here. It feels like the apartment is slowly swallowing me whole, drawing me deeper into its secrets. I don't know what's behind that door, but I feel its presence growing stronger, waiting for the moment when I'll be drawn back inside. I've heard that no one ever really leaves the forgotten room once they've entered. And now, I think I understand why. Thank you for joining me on this journey tonight. I hope you found some peace and comfort in the story. Before you drift off into sleep, I'd love to know what time it is where you are and which country you're watching from. Feel free to share in the comments. And, of course, don't forget to like and subscribe for more chilling tales. Until next time, rest easy and sweet dreams.